Gotta do recording. All right, what else? What are some other things you've been able to take away? So Raquel says she's making a list of what she needs to prioritize by 2 minutes or less, and 15 minutes or less. Awesome, awesome. One more. What else have we been able to implement? Lots of mind sweeping. Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. All right, cool. So continue that as a practice, even if you just try to change one thing in your behavior as it relates to goal setting and time management. That's how we get that forward movement. So keep working at that. I did receive some of your field work, and I have a couple of you that have to get back to you related to feedback, but you guys produced some great work. Your SWOT analysis are so in-depth and so thorough. I really appreciate that. And I love some of the work that you guys have been doing with delegating, because that's another part of making sure that we are being efficient as we possibly can with our time. Everything does not have to be done by us, as much as we think that it'll get done better by us. When we kind of think about all the different things that we have on our plates, particularly if you're a leader, we have to trust the people that we hired and start to provide them with some of those experiences so that they can continue to learn and grow as well. So I'm going to share my screen and pray. All right, give me a thumbs up, Peggy, if you can see my screen, because you're the one I can see. Awesome. All right, so effective communication and listening. So when we think about our journey for Leadership Institute this year, as you know, the program is broken out into 3 sections. The first section was all about self, and so that was the first part of our time together. So today we're actually delving into relationship with others, so building relationship with others, and that's where we're going to be focusing our time today. I need to drop in the participant guide, and I'll do that in a second. So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to be spending some time talking about the key success factors to effective communication. We also are going to spend some time discovering how to modify our communication preferences to inspire others that we work with. The other part of, which is not in the title, but it's important to throw this in, this whole idea of giving and receiving feedback, because that's a part of communication and listening, right? Do we give it, and how well do we receive it? And then we'll I'll share with you some practical tools on how you can improve communication with people. So let me get out of this and drop into the share your participant guide. I'll actually give you both documents that we're using today. I'll put them both in at the same time, so you can download it. Uh-oh. It is not liking that. Let me try the next one. Okay, so do you guys see the one that says effective communication in the chat? Cool. Let me try this other one that didn't take it the first time. One second, I'm going to try to find it in a different part of my computer. Okay, I'll worry about that over a break. Okay, so you can download your discussion planner, and you can have access to that and mark it up, do your thing with that, and then once I get a chance, I'll drop in the discussion planner. All right, so let's go back. So that's how we're going to spend our time. So as we think about communication and listening with intention, sometimes a lot of that is easier said than done. And so how focused are we? How present are we? How intentional are we at listening and communicating? When we communicate and listen with intention, we open the door to endless possibilities to being stronger relationships and better communication. Those are the things that are really important. So I didn't just say that for my health. So I want you guys to do me a favor and drop in the chat what I just said. What did I just say? You guys remember what I just said? Nobody remember? Okay, listen with attention. Okay, okay. All right, Jane. Okay, Jane. What else? So if we could be real honest in this moment, how many of us were like, when I said, what did I just say? You're on the inside, you were like, what did she just say? Like, if we could be real honest with each other in this moment, right? Because we're family. How many of you were like, oh my God, what did she just say? Thank you, Susie. How many else were like, oh Lord? But doesn't that happen? Like someone says something to us, they communicate to us, and by the end of what they just said, you're sitting there like, okay, now what did they just say to me? So we missed a big part of that. So I'm going to show you exactly what I said. Some of you picked up on it. I'm going to show you exactly what I just said. All right, so this is what I said. When we communicate and listen with intention, we open the door to endless possibilities to being strong relationships and better outcomes. So some of us was able to get the gist of the message. Some of us picked up the two core components, strong relationships and better outcomes, but we missed the first part of it. So I'm going to try that again. And this time I want to invite you to be very intentional about how you're listening. How can you be present with what it is that I'm saying? Now, some of us might try to take notes, but when you're in regular communication with someone, do you typically take notes with everything that they're saying? Not necessarily, but how can you be present and intentional about listening? So here it is, being intentional. What is your appetite for giving and receiving feedback? What is at stake when we don't do it or we don't do it well? What is your appetite for giving and receiving feedback? What is at stake when we don't do it or we don't do it well? Drop it in the chat. What did I just say? Okay, Liz, taking and giving feedback. What else? What else did I say? When we were intentional about being present with my words, what did I say? And you can unmute yourselves too if you want to say it out loud. You can do that too. What is your appetite for giving and receiving feedback? Yep.
What is our appetite for giving and receiving feedback? What is at stake when we don't do it or if we don't do it well?
Perfect. Awesome. So you see how much more robust our recollection of what I said is because you were intentional about listening. And then because when you're in communication with someone, it's a part of receiving and giving back, right? It's that two-way. And so the first part of it is to be able to receive it. And then the second part is to be able to kind of regurgitate that back. Now, we don't go around with everyone and saying, okay, let me tell you exactly what I just heard you say. But we notified people that we were listening based on how we engage with them. So part of a tip that we say, and we'll talk more about this, is let me make sure I understand what you're saying, and you restate what they said in your own words, and they'll either say, yep, that's it, or no, that was completely off, and then you can have them restate it if need be. But it shows that you have intention on being intentional by saying, here's what I think I heard you say, and that really helps to make sure that we don't have any misunderstanding in communication. So here is what I actually said, and you guys hit it on the head already. What is your appetite for receiving feedback, giving and receiving feedback? And what is at stake when we don't do it or we don't do it well? And that's really the gist of a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. So I want to level set and start to give some definition around this thing called communication so that we're on the same page. Communication is a two-way information sharing process which involves one party sending a message that is easily understood by the receiving party. Two-way information sharing that involves one party sending a message that is easily understood by the receiving party. Now, the challenge with this is when we're sending a communication in our own mind, it is as clear as a bell, right? We know exactly what it is that we're trying to communicate. But sometimes our intention or our message is lost in translation. And so how can we minimize the opportunity for people to misunderstand what we're saying? And so you're going to get some tools today on how to communicate very clearly and concisely so that your important message does not get lost in translation. So that's our definition of communication. So I'm curious to hear from you guys around how has ineffective communication negatively impacted business outcomes in your company. So either where you're a leader of this in this company or you're a staff member, there are times when an ineffective communication really impacts a business. And then the other example I want you guys to give are examples of effective communication in action that resulted in amazing outcomes. So those two questions, ineffective communication, how has it impacted business outcomes? And then when has good communication served your organization really well? Talk to me, you can unmute yourselves. When has negative communication impacted the business? Now, our cone of silence, right, is in this group is what's happening in Zoom room stays in Zoom room, but I also recognize that some of you are colleagues in the Zoom room. And so hopefully we can have some really good adult conversation anyway, because what's real is real. So talk to me, Kevin, what you got?
So I'll actually talk about, I work for a different company, so I feel a little bit easier talking about the negative communication with my second job. But one of the things I don't particularly like is the relative lack of communication up and down the chain of command. A lot of times our status is kind of ambiguous as far as work hours, responsibilities, and that leaves kind of an uneasy feeling between coworkers and between superiors. And I think, you know, a good, strong organization leaves very little room for interpretation as far as what the expectations are. And, you know, this particular company doesn't do that very well.
Okay. And so when you say that it leaves space for misinterpretation of it, if you had to give your recommendation on how to improve that dynamic, what would your one key success factor be to improve it?
Regular check-ins. I think regular conversations between superiors and inferiors would be extremely helpful.
Okay. So we're hearing ongoing communication is one thing, and feedback and follow-ups and check-ins are important. What are some other ineffective communication behaviors and how it's negatively impacted the business?
Well, I think that if we lack to answer follow-up questions, that could have a negative impact. And having a positive impact is if you don't understand something or if you need more information about a specific topic or subject, to follow up and ask more questions to have a clear understanding rather than just leaving for you to interpret yourself.
Yeah, great. Some other thoughts. Ineffective communication, how has it impacted the business? It could be your own business, it could be the organization you work for.
I can go. Many of us work at the Y and we move really quickly. And so I kind of really agree with what Demira says. so often we move so quickly, we put in all the details and we kind of make assumptions. And so being able to clearly ask for more details and, having it be okay to not clearly understand and come back and say, I need more information. Because I think sometimes we move so swiftly that if we don't ask more questions, we always assume that everybody else has the same picture that we painted in their heads and they only have the framework.
Yeah, that's great. What I liked about what you just said, Marianne, is I think an important piece of this, not only as leaders within the organization, but even in our personal lives, it's giving people permission to ask for clarity. Because I think that there are times when, particularly when we're thinking about hierarchical roles, whether it's as parents, as leaders in an organization, or whatever the case might be, there's this perception that you can't ask questions or you can't clarify, you can't push back. So is that the experience that we want to create for people, that they can't push back on whatever it is that we're sharing? If we want to get great outcomes within our organization and within our relationships, we have to give people permission and invite them to ask questions if they don't have the clarity, or to even push back a bit to say, I hear where you're going. Here are some other things you may want to consider. Do we have an appetite for that? And that's part of the receiving feedback piece. How about positive communication? How has that really helped drive positive outcomes within your organization? Because I think that's the key, is where is it happening really well and what's happening that's making it work really well? So love to hear your thoughts. Drop it in the chat or unmute yourself. What does good communication look like, and what is that impact? What has that impact been?
We've since we've shifted to a remote work environment for NCTV 17, news-wise, we kind of had to shift our communication style, and that meant daily news calls with the team, every day, just to do check-ins and catch up on where everyone's at and stories and any news of note. And that's been really effective in terms of, leading from afar and just being up to date on what everyone's working on. So I think that would be a good example for our particular team.
Yeah. And you have to be very deliberate right now that it's a new environment. How we communicated pre-COVID and how we communicate during, now during COVID, what does that look like? And so in your participant guide, just jot down some of the positive things that we know to be true to help foster effective communication. So Kevin mentioned it, Kim mentioned it, the follow-up. And Marianne talked about the importance of giving people permission to ask for clarifying questions, and Damaris is talking about that as well. So just jot down some key success factors that really help with fostering good communication. Any other thoughts around good communication and how it can positively impact the business? Because we're jotting these down as kind of our tip sheet to take away with us. What are some other good tips you guys have?
I have
Just
one.
For me at the Y too, we use the word alignment a lot, and I have found that to be really effective when we take the time to make sure everyone's aligned and on at least in the same chapter of the book, So I think that word alignment has been really helpful for me, and taking the time to make sure that we have that before moving forward. Yeah. Perfect. Or level setting. Yeah.
Okay. And I heard Peggy chime in, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name. Denidra?
Yes, you can go, Peggy. I'll go after you.
Thanks. I was just going to say, to what Kevin was saying, we have our possibility conversations that occur every other week with staff that have a structured format, but it's also a time to just communicate, how are you doing personally? and we document it. Sorry, excuse me. But I think the key, that's all I've been dealing with this morning, was a major mass communication thing that happened over the weekend internally. I think we all need to have patience with multiple levels of communication. Some people need an email, some people need a phone call, some people need it all, some people need a text. And like Marianne was saying, we're so fast at the Y. I think it's leaders to slow your roll to make sure your message is being received and you're having the time, making the time in your schedule to receive those messages. I think that is key. That's where things get lost, that maybe people aren't checking their emails till Saturday or 9 o'clock at night or 3 a.m, or, or whatever. So I just think being cognizant of the multiple ways you need to communicate an important message when things move so fast. And this era of Zoom where you get zero energy or feedback from any communication, it's extra tricky and things can go awry fast, in my opinion.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. Thank you, Peggy. Go ahead. Is it
So mine
pronounced,
is
did I pronounce it right? Is it Denidra or Donidra?
Donidra.
Donidra, okay.
Yes. Mine is similar to Peggy's. I think what works well for me is allowing my direct reports to lead our check-ins on a regular basis. So we have weekly check-ins individually with each of my direct reports. And then we also have a weekly team meeting. And the check-ins are usually run by the direct report based off of what is most priority for them during the week. But then the weekly team meeting is where we all share what's going on in our individual worlds of work. And then we also use that time to talk about strategy. So it's a time for us to get updated on what else is going on outside of our individual functions. And I found that to be super helpful, especially when I look at other teams within my organization who don't have a regular cadence for these types of meetings. It just, the communication is not as great as it could be because our team is like meeting on a weekly basis and making sure that we cover all the bases. And the most important part for me is that I don't have to set that structure, my team does. So it's like they bring up what is most important to them, and then I help with any strategy or anything like that. But I think that has worked very well for me because in other cases where I've worked, like it's harder when someone else dictates what's important to you. It's like, why do I have to tell you what's important to you? You should tell me what's important to you, and let's go from there.
Yeah, I like that. So empowering your team to be able to share their insight and their expertise and their experience, because they sit closest to the thing. And so to have them share their perspective and lead in that way, it's powerful because it sends a message that you trust them. And that's also a part of communication. It's those things that, some of the things that we don't necessarily say that also sends a message to the people around us. So I love what's happening in the chat that says celebrating wins. We focus a lot around, okay, so what went wrong with that? But we don't spend enough time focusing on, well, what went right with it? So debriefing is really important in that space. So embedding that into your practices is important, not only professionally, but personally as well. Also, positive feedback is important, and that definitely, and balanced feedback, right? Because sometimes when the boss says, hey, I need to talk to you, and they say that, what happens when your boss says, I need to talk to you? What happens? We got to go to the bathroom because our stomach is upset. Yep, the heart palpitations, and we got all these different ideas going on in our head, like, oh my word, I need to pack up my office because I'm about to be fired, right? Like all these things are going on in our head. And we have to ask ourselves, do I create that same kind of experience for the people who report to me? When I say, can I talk to you in my office, do they go through those same type of emotional turmoil? But if we provide balanced feedback, when we say, hey, can I talk to you? Then people won't have that apprehension or that anxiety because they get both the positive and constructive feedback. It's balanced. Trust, yeah, Catherine, trust is important as well. Speaking the right language for understanding goes a long way, right? And being approachable. And we're gonna actually talk about that, Kim, a little bit later, is how do we make it safe for us to have these open communications with people? We say, oh yeah, I have an open door policy, oh yeah, you can talk to me about anything. And the minute that they do, we bite their heads off. And then we wonder, why are they behaving the way that they are towards us? Well, do you think that maybe you had a little something to do with that? And so we're going to talk about how do we make sure we're mindful of the kind of environments we create for people to want to communicate with us. So, so important. All right. So here's a chart. Let me move my box. Here's a chart that kind of shows how time is spent communicating. Not communicating is 30%, and even in our sleep, we do a lot of communicating to ourselves, but 70% is communicating. And that 70% part of the pie is broken down in this way. So 45% should be listening. 30% speaking, writing is 9%, and reading is 16%. So as you can see, the biggest parts of our communication is what we say and what we take in. A lot of times we all know that it's important to listen more and speak less. But is that typically what happens? Is it typically that we listen more and speak less? That's ideally how it should be, but that's not necessarily always the case. And so I just want us to be mindful of the importance of, since these are the two major modes of communication, where do we spend most of our time? Do we spend most of our time listening, or do we spend most of our time speaking? I know many of you probably have already heard this, but God gave us what? 2 ears and 1 mouth. So to spend more time listening versus always speaking. So what is the true cost of poor communication? And many of you talked about this when we were kind of doing our roundtable just a minute ago. And one of the key things that a major contributing loss of cost is lack of focus. So inefficiency in terms of how people spend their time together. So for example, if there's a lack of focus, when you come into a meeting, that is the most chaotic experience when there's a lack of focus. When there is no communication about why you're there, when there is no communication about the deliverables, there's no follow-up items that are shared. It just makes for that time to be a waste of time. So lack of focus is a huge cost, which really is, our time is penalized. Failure of purpose, so inability to communicate a vision. How are we communicating our vision, whether it be for our department, whether it be for our family? How do we write that vision and make it plain for people to understand the direction that we're going? Because if no one knows the direction, we're not communicating that, then whatever strategy we're trying to implement will just die on the vine. Lack of innovation is another true cost. And this is our inability to launch new initiatives or launch new projects. So if we don't sit down and spend time and say, what got us here isn't going to get us there, so how do we plan for it? How do we innovate? Without those kinds of conversations with one another, our business could potentially suffer. So what is your kind of rigorous process that you do with your team in order to stay innovative and communicate and invite people to be a part of that process? Morale also is impacted by poor communication. People are looking to leave. And when people leave, that costs a lot of money. So if you look at what statistics tell us, SHRM tells us that turnover is typically an employee's average salary. That's a lot of money. So let's say you have someone making $40,000. To replace that person, it's going to cost about $40,000. Multiply that by the number of people within your organization who have left over a course of a year. Try that exercise. Just as a guiding light, just take that salary, multiply by the number of people who have left, and see how much cost that is to your organization. It is significant. I used to work in healthcare, and that was millions and millions, and I worked in HR and healthcare, millions of dollars lost because of turnover. So we want to make sure that our communication is such that people are inspired to want to be there and continue to contribute the best version of themselves. Poor communication also compromises our credibility, not only as individuals, but as an organization. If we have some significant changes happening within our organization and our community knows nothing about it, then they dismiss us. Or if there are some things that's important for us to communicate within our roles individually, and we don't, people don't trust what it is that you're trying to say. And that's someone that mentioned, Kate, I think it was Catherine mentioned that earlier, the importance of trust. So lack of communication really compromises our credibility. And sometimes the key is to just have the right tools to communicate. And you guys are gonna get one today to really help house those key messages that you're trying to share. Any other costs that you guys can think of, the true cost of poor communication? What are some other things that you see have been impacted that might not be on this list that we can add to the list? I see a couple things happening in the chat. Let's see. Yep, innovation is key when the solution has room for individual creativity. Confidentiality is very important for effective communication. Absolutely. Can I trust that when I tell you this, that it's not going to go all over the organization or all over the neighborhood or wherever it goes? Any thoughts, any additional thoughts on the true cost of poor communication? Awesome sauce.
Broken relationships.
Yeah. And you know, and that's a huge one. Broken relationships.
Very huge.
Yeah. Say more about it, Lynetta.
I was, well, one of the things I would say about it, and that I'm very proud of within our team in particular, I work with the Y2, and my colleague is already agreeing. But I work in a young parents program, and one of the things I'm proud of is how we took the time to learn each other and avoid broken relationships and really build a relationship by when you have those moments when the communication is off or there's conflict, and somebody may misunderstand something. We actually took the time to pause, be approachable, and come and talk about it, and then you get the clarity, you get the understanding, you get the resolve issues rather than keep playing it in your head and, making assumptions and everything and breaking up as a team as a result. But we were able to work through things, and I just love our dynamics.
So
yeah.
Lynetta, that's what you're talking about is what so many organizations want to be able to get to, because there's so much dysfunction that people just don't like to be around each other. So what would you say you guys did together as a team to create that kind of culture where you guys have permission to have those more difficult conversations?
Well, I guess being approachable is key, and allowing it, being willing and open to it, and being able to check yourself. Well, I'll speak from me, you know what I mean? So what I'm passionate about, I am very protective of. And that trust thing, honey, it is something else. I tell you, when you have to trust people with what you're passionate about and taking care of the thing that, you're responsible of. So for me, I run our group services for our young moms, with our peer group learning sessions. And so that's very dear to me. I want to protect the moms. I want to protect the environment so that they're able to learn, they're able to receive. And so I don't want anybody just coming in that environment without the right energy, who's not going to make sure the same thing happens, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes because of that, it is that behavior, of mine that shows that I'm protective, can be misunderstood, right? And then I have to be willing to hear, my colleagues' feedback and accept, how it's coming across to them. And so if the issue is being brought up, well, I guess this is something people could take away. If the issue is being brought up, don't brush it under the table, because I could, in my mind, because I know that I'm coming from a good place, be like whatever, to my colleagues and not care how things may come across. Or, I could be like I have been, thankfully, and have a conversation, so then they'll know what's behind my actions, you know what I mean? I'll know what's behind their actions, you know what I mean?
Right.
And now we can have dialogue and we can see how we can support each other rather than feel maybe left out or feel attacked or, just walk around with all of these thoughts in our minds like I said before, just making assumptions, creating stories, and keeping conflict there, like
Right.
I'm not going to deal with it. Forget it. I don't want to work with her then. No, we were able to, we're approachable. When there's an issue, we bring it out and we talked it out and we gave each other time. I will say this other thing, and then I'll shut up because, I'm sure somebody else got something to say.
You're fine.
Give things time too. Relationship building takes time. It takes time to get to understand some things about people that you're working with. Don't give up so easily. So yes, I'm proud of us in YPP team because we did that. We gave each other time, paid attention to each other, learned some things about each other, and brought it to the table, so we can work through those things where we didn't understand.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks for sharing that.
I hope that makes sense.
It makes complete sense. I hope people were taking notes and jotting it down because I think it's really, really important. And so I'm looking at what was in the chat. So loss of time because something needs to be redone. Right. And there's a cost associated with that, right? And so taking the time to really communicate clearly so that we don't have redundancy or having to rework. Sometimes you have to fix the attitude towards communication based on past experiences. Yeah, what is the attitude towards communication? And is it fair to punish people because of what we experienced from other people in the past? Right? Is it okay to say because I experienced this lack of trust or lack of communication with this person that now I can't trust what you're saying? And so it's not fair to penalize people for that dynamic. Cheryl says, this makes me think of organization issues around communication. What if the organization isn't willing to look at communication? Perhaps just look at employee level of failure, lack of innovation, when really the issue might be at the organizational level. This seems to be a huge issue. Cheryl, this is a huge dynamic. And in organizational development, there are three things that we look at when we look at organizational change. And those three things are organizational, people, and structural. So those are the different levels when we think about changing an organization. And a lot of times, the one place that we automatically go to when something goes awry is the people level. When in fact, there might be other things at play that may have caused the people to act and behave and perform in that way. So we need to first go to how are we structured? And what are some of those other systemic things within the organization that we might need to change before we automatically assume that it's the people? People, process, structure. But we want to go to people first all the time. So that's a really key point, Cheryl, that as organizations and as leaders of organizations, there's stuff that we own, and that people don't just behave and perform in that way just because. But what is the process that's happening that we might need to fix? Great point. Sweeping issues under the rug and avoiding them, definitely. It will be horrible to just sweep it under the rug, and we're going to get courage, right, to step up to the conversation, because sometimes it's not that we don't want to address it, it's just we think about the unintended consequences of trying to address an issue. We think we might make it worse, and so we just don't say anything at all. But you're going to get some skills on how to step up to those conversations moving forward. So I think we are let's go ahead and take our first break at this point before we hop into our second segment of this, which is going to be around listening. But before we do that, any questions around this whole bigger umbrella around communication and the conversation we've had thus far? Nope. Cool. So let's take 10. Let's take 11 because it just went to 9:49. So let's come back at 10 on the dot, and then we'll hop into this next section. Don't log off though, because I think I'm going to try to put some breakout rooms together, and I need to see everyone's name. So on our break, don't log off. I'll see you at 10.
the organization, so I can't do anything about it. And I'm kind of wondering what the onus is of the individuals as well, because sometimes we'll say, oh, well, it's top down. But I think change can be made from the bottom up too, right? So not just saying, well, we have as an organization, have a poor communication strategy or plan.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really good point, because I think you're right. There are some, just like sometimes the organization will say that we can't drive change because the staff aren't acting right. And then you have staff that say, I can't do anything because the organization doesn't have their act together. So it's like, it's coming from both sides. But the question becomes, approaching it from both sides, what role can I play, or what role do I play? So let's say from an individual contributor perspective, if there are some concerns, or there are some processes that need to be fixed, or there are some inefficiency or things that's getting in the way of a person feeling like they can contribute the best version of themselves, then they owe it to themselves and to the organization to go to whomever is the power that be to say, can I share an observation, or can I share my experience with you, versus throwing the hands up and saying, okay, it's the organization's fault. And I think it's the other side is also true. The organization soliciting feedback and perspective from staff to say, how can we do this better? So when each entity that is a part of this organism called an organization take responsibility for themselves or itself, then that's where communication opens up and we really can start to see some changes happening. But when this happens, that's when nothing happens. So it's individual ownership. The other piece that comes into part of that is, what is our level of engagement with our work? Do I even care about producing great quality work? And then so there has to be some kind of processes in place to be able to address that, like low performance, because it's people who demonstrate low performer behavior or low performer performance that carry the mentality that you were just talking about. It's like, it's the organization's fault and don't want to take responsibility. So there has to be a process where the organization starts to weed out people who don't want to be there and who don't want to contribute.
I really appreciate that, because I think it's, comes from both top down and bottom up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it has to be that it's each entity, each person, each part of the organization taking responsibility and ownership to communicate. But you do see people who are low performers who just need any excuse not to do a good job, any excuse not to contribute. And so we have to start to weed that out. We hang on to people who don't want to be a part of our organization way too long, way too long. That's an amazing point, Mary. We'll have to figure out how we can kind of interweave that part of what you're saying into some content, because I think that's really important. And part of it, I might be able to weave into managing conflict to address those dynamics.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that feedback.
Welcome back, everyone. So now we're going to hop into this awesome thing called listening, because that's a really important part of communication, is how do we listen? So I'm actually there's a couple of breakout rooms that we're going to have. The one that I was trying to maneuver, we're just going to have to improvise because we got a lot of changes from our initial list. So we'll improvise, but for this one, it's going to be a simple breakout. So here's what I want you to do when you get in your room. You're going to be in groups of 2. I think if we have an odd number, which we might, counting me, there might be one group of 3. But you're going to identify someone as a speaker and someone as a listener. Those are the roles that we're going to have in the room. Speaker, your role is to share with your partner information about you. It could be your role, who you work for, what are you most proud of, what are some of your career aspirations, family, what you enjoy about Leadership Institute. It could be any of those things. Listener, your job, your only job is to listen. Don't take notes, just listen. Once they are done sharing what they've shared with you, the speaker, then I want you to share back what you heard them say. So this goes back to that whole piece around listening intently, and being present with the person that you are communicating with. Okay, so we got a speaker role and a listener role. Then once you do that, then I want you to switch. So now the speaker becomes a listener and the listener becomes the speaker. Okay, so you're gonna have a total of about, if I wanted to be mean, I would say 10 minutes, but that would be mean. So I'm gonna say you guys are gonna have a total of about 7 minutes. So split that time wisely. Actually, no, I'll give you 5 minutes because the speakers that it would be excruciating, have to talk a long time. So I'm gonna give you a total of 5 minutes. So split that time. So 2.5 minutes will be on this, speaking and then sharing what you heard, and then switch about 2.5 minutes. I'll give you the halfway point mark. It'll show up on your screen when you're halfway through. Okay. All right, so if someone want to take a screenshot of what you guys are doing and what you're saying, go ahead and do that so that you can take this with you in your breakout room. So I won't take this slide down just yet. Take a picture of this so that you know, speakers, what you're kind of talking about. It doesn't have to be anything specific, but these are just some ideas, and listener, just take it all in and then speak back what you heard them say. Cool. All right, so let us hop in our rooms. Any questions I can answer before I throw you out? Not throw you out. Put you in your breakout room. That wasn't good communication. So I'm gonna put you. Give me a minute. Let me create. 28. All right. 2 people. 1, 2, 3. Okay. And here we go. Let me see what this is looking like. Lucy, I'm gonna move you to your phone, and I'm gonna move Jane to 10. Okay, move to 10. All right, we are all set. We are looking good. We actually have 2 people per room. Rick, I think you might be in a room, which is cool. All right, I'll see you guys back in about 5.5 minutes. Here we go. Oh. Lucy, can you hear me?
You don't have headphones in?
Oh, I tried to move you. Let me see if I can, because I put you and your sound in the room. So I'm not. All right, so for my person who was listening, talk to me about what was the most challenging part of that process, and what do you think you did really well? What was the challenging part of listening, and what do you think you did really well?
I was this Lynetta. I was speaking with Rick, and oh, no problem, Rick. Thank you. And I wanted to make sure that I didn't interrupt. I wanted to listen. I wanted to make sure I paused before I engaged in what he was saying. But then also, because of, you know, what we're doing, being intentional, I was trying to remember a lot too, which I didn't want that to take away from the conversation.
Yeah.
It was nice. It was nice listening, a lot hearing about it.
Yeah. Cool.
And if I may add, what she did is she did a great job of summarizing the high points. Instead of just saying, here's what you said and repeating back verbatim, did a real good job of picking up on one work-related item and one personal-related item that I had shared through the speaking part.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, thank you for saying that. That's cool.
Nice.
I can go. I have to get off the call for a few minutes, in about 15 minutes. But one of the things, so I'm a numbers person. So I retained every number that she gave me. I worked here for this many years, worked here for this many years. I got all of that. But I think the most difficult part for me is trying to capture every single thing that she said. I was afraid that, okay, what if I missed a great part, which I did actually, but I actually remembered it. It was stored in the back of my mind because she was like, I love what I do. And when I had to tell her, repeat back what I heard, I missed that part, but it was in there. So just keeping every single word and trying to remember that, I think that was like really difficult for me. But then just trying to highlight the things that was most important.
Yeah. And I think though, Damaris, I want to take the pressure off of you just a little bit by saying you don't necessarily have to remember every single word someone is saying, but to be able to capture enough where you can summarize what you heard them say. Because if we try to capture every single word, it makes it really hard. But if you're intentional about being present, then the important things will come up if you had to kind of say that back. So take the pressure off a bit. You don't have to remember exactly everything, but the gist of it will work. Cool. So awesome. Who else? Go ahead, James.
I'll go. I was with Sophia from YWCA and Project Help. And I think one of the things that made it easier was sort of pre-knowledge, right? Even though I don't know Sophia well, I know her organization really well and the people she works with. So that was helpful in terms of, as she was talking about some of those things, it was sort of affirmation of information I already had, so I could concentrate a little bit more on the things that were unique that she was telling me. So I think that helped.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Shawnee, I think you were going, I don't see, where did you go?
Yes.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Megan.
Mm-hmm.
I was with Megan. It's not hard for me to listen because I'm the type, I'm very observant. So I listen and I can tell you things that you probably won't even remember that you told me or said about yourself. So that was easy for me.
Okay, cool. Megan, how about you?
So I am the other side. I am typically a terrible listener. I will admit. I have two young ones at home, and so my mind's always like in other places. Like, what do I got to do over here and over there, and what about work and all of those places. So I was trying to be more intentional in this session to just focus in on what she had to say and make sure I'm actually retaining it, and not thinking about my emails going pinging off in the corner right now. So.
Yeah. And you make a good point, Megan, is that, when we have so many things going on, right, our lives are busy and our lives can get really chaotic. And sometimes to just slow down, it's hard for us. If we could be really honest with ourselves, it's hard for us. And so we're hearing passively, but we're not necessarily listening. So I heard this story once where there was a daughter in the kitchen with her mom, and the mom was busy doing something, and the daughter tapped her and said, shared a story with her. And she said, "Mom, are you listening to me?" And mom was busy doing, she's like, "Yeah, I'm listening. And she stopped her mom and she said, "Mom, can you listen with your eyes?" Right? So it's, can we have a moment where we can be here connected? Because mom was busy, right? And we do that at work, home, we're busy, and we're like, yeah, I hear you. But are we listening with our eyes? And so are we really present? So that's something that we have to really think about is, how do we pause for a moment to be present? Any other reflections on the listening piece of it? Yeah, Kevin, what you got?
One of the big components of my job is to interview people. And so when I was talking with Cheryl, I tried not to put on the interview face where you're always trying to formulate the next question, and instead try and retain and understand the information that's coming at you without the busy mind of trying to figure out what's next in the conversation.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge part of listening, is not listening to respond, but listening to understand. And
say that one more time, Kevin. Say that one more time. Say that one more time.
It's really difficult to listen to understand as opposed to listen to respond.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a powerful point. And I didn't mean to cut you off, but because that point was so powerful. It's because I was actually having this conversation before the session about exactly what you just mentioned, Kevin, which is, what is our intent when we're listening? Is our intent to be so far forward in the conversation and so ahead of the other person because we're anticipating what they're saying? And because we're trying to anticipate what they're saying, we're missing what they're actually saying. Because we're sitting there, so it's like, okay, I have to know how I'm going to respond to this person. So that's where your brain is. It's, how am I going to respond to this? What is going to be my reaction to this? We start to make assumptions about what they're going to say next, right? We're like, okay, I know exactly where this conversation is going, and we're everywhere here. We're everywhere except here. So how can we show up in the conversation in a way where we're not in our brain so much that we're anticipating, we're making assumptions, we're trying to problem solve before we even know what the situation is? So let's give it a beat and pause. One more reflection.
Tish, if I may, children have a way of recalibrating the way you communicate. There's times where, like, my daughter will be like, Mom, active listening, because I'll be putting dishes away, and she's telling me something that happened in school, and she doesn't think, and I am listening, but I'm not actively listening, where, like you said, someone said, listen to me with your eyes. And I think it's so important to like pause, because as a parent, someone else mentioned, with the 2 young kids, your mind's everywhere. We do hear everything. But it's really important for the other person to understand that we are listening. Just because we know the way our mind works, our mind says, yeah, I'm listening to everything they say, and I know everything that they're telling me. But if I'm not actively listening, where they feel they're being acknowledged, you could kind of tell, like, their voice will trail off and be like, because mom's not really listening. So my kids will now, my 20-year-old, she's not a kid, she'll be like, Mom. And then I know that I'm sorry, babe, sorry. And I'll put down like the Swiffer or the Dust Buster or whatever. And I'm sorry. And I'll say something like, baby, I'm sorry, I'm present. What's up? And then she's more like, okay, Mom. And then she'll say later, Mom, that was also for you, because you need to chill. she has a way of having me center and focus, because they want to be heard, and they want to know that they're being heard, and in a way that's not just like mom listening, where we're like all over the place, but real intentional listening. So I think our children, and the children that I've worked with, really have a way of pulling you where you have to be present. And that has helped me with adults as well, where I'm like, okay, I need to be an active listener, because I'm a fidgety person. I'm always writing, taking notes, and I'm always doing, but it's really important to like let the other person know, just because I'm listening, but if I'm doing other things, the other person might feel they don't care about what I have to say. So I think it's very important to be intentional with listening.
Yeah. And wouldn't it be powerful, whether it's in our office setting or in our home setting, where when someone starts talking to us, we stop what we're doing? If someone walks into our office, like our desk is this way, they walk into our office and we stop what we're doing and turn towards them. or if our children or our significant other, our spouses begin to talk to us and we don't do the thing that we normally do, which is they're coming this way and we do this. But what if we, on all seriousness, what if we just stopped what we were doing and gave them our eyes? How powerful would that be? And then, like the message, Raquel, you said it's sending the message that what they say matters and that we're truly listening. So, you know, that's a note to me too, because I get going. It's like, okay, yeah, baby, what you say, baby? What? And instead of just stopping what I'm doing and just giving that eye contact and being intentional. Marianne, you are hilarious. What you dropped in the chat when you were talking with Raquel, I look for experiences that I could relate to do so. So you can remember I was with Raquel. I was a little distracted though when she said she's a mom of 4 and the oldest is 27. That's funny. Respect, it's about saying what you have to say is important. Absolutely. If you give your eyes, you're also reading nonverbal communication. Yes. When the words aren't giving you all the info. Abso-freaking-lutely. And in our chart, our participant guide, what I want you to do is that I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit because of Jane's comment, because I think it's important. The power of the unspoken, right? It's those nonverbals that speak really loud, whether it's our own nonverbals or the nonverbals of the other person. And if we're not watching, we miss it. Those nonverbals tell us, are they really tracking with us or not? Have they left the conversation and we're still talking? We won't know that unless we're having some eye-to-eye contact. So we'll come back to that piece because there's a point in the slide that we would do that. But on the art of listening section, it says here, my areas of opportunity to improve my listening skills are. And so what I want you to do is just take a quick moment and just jot down 1 or 2 things that you could do to improve your communication. And if that thing doesn't get improved, what's the impact of that? So I just want you to take about 2 minutes, jot down 1 or 2 things, areas of opportunity. What I also want you to do in that third box is write down what you already do well and what is the impact of that thing that you already do well. So I'll give you 2 minutes. Do that. Talk to me. Anybody talk to?
Well, I think it's challenging with Zoom because I'm an interrupter. You know, I act, and it's something I recognized a while back, and I actively try and manage. You know, much as you do this, I try and count in my head. Thanks to Rick, who gave me some really good techniques. But you know, with Zoom, it's hard sometimes because you're waiting for the delay and you want to be respectful. And so I find like this new environment has been, you know, kind of a new challenge. And also it does give you, you know, it forces you to look at the screen though as well. And that's actually been pretty helpful in a lot of ways because you do have to watch for those cues, you know, and that's been helpful to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you're right. It's like you really, because otherwise, if you're not looking and you're looking down, you best believe you're gonna miss something. So to be able to be like to look at the camera and then you can pick up on those pause moments still as if you were with them in person. Hopefully they have their camera on too, so that you can pick up on what's happening in their body language. So Raquel said your kids say that you're an interrupter and a finisher of sentences. Do we find that we communicate different at home than we do at work? That we listen differently at home and at work? Why is that? Why do we do that?
I think we're more comfortable, you know, we're more comfortable at home. You're just being yourself. Mm-hmm. And you know you're going to be loved either way. But I definitely love to learn how not to be an interrupter when I'm speaking to my husband. Or with my, I mean, it's easy. I would say it's easy sometimes being an interrupter amongst friends, because even though, as you said, Tish, I do want that pause as well, because we get so excited, we want to respond, but we know how to communicate and interrupt and still keep going. If I do that to my husband, he shuts down. It's like, can I speak? So he's not able to answer, just say, let me finish what I was saying, or, let me respond to your first question without him getting frustrated and shutting down. But if I'm doing it with my sisters or my friends, we just keep going. The conversation keep going. We finish each other's sentences, or we clap hands, we agree. So it's kind of different.
Yeah. It's because this comes up a lot when I'm doing different courses around communication. And the answer to the question always is yes. The way that I am at home and the way that I am at work is two very different things. It looks different. And I says, well, how so? And a lot of times people say, well, I'm much more deliberate and professional at work. I'm much more mindful of what I say. I'm much more mindful of how I say it. Well, why is that? Because I don't want to lose my job, because I want to have really good working relationships. I don't want to people to experience me a certain way. That's all cool. My challenge to you is, just as we are so intentional about showing up in the best way possible with our coworkers, isn't it that much more important that we show up in the best way possible in our personal lives? Because at the end of the day, relationships we have at home, none of that can be replaced. What kinds of deposits are we making in those relationship bank accounts at home? We do a lot of deposits into those relationship accounts at work, right? We do a lot of deposits. We don't want to do anything to deplete. But at home, to Lynetta's point, people are forgiving. And so we make a lot of withdrawals from that account. And a lot of times we don't always replace it with additional deposits. And so before we know it, our personal lives, our relationships can become bankrupt. So I really want to challenge us that just as deliberate as we are at work to be mindful of how we show up, that we're just as, if not more deliberate about how we show up at home. And that's not to say like we have our dynamics, right? Like Lynetta was talking about, we have our dynamics that works for our circles at home. And there are times though that we do things and we know what we do that takes out of that relationship bank account. So I want to encourage us to make more deposits than we do withdrawals. Cool? Thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs up. Awesome. All right, so let's see where we, I think we are almost. Oh, here's that'd be helpful if I share my screen. So what happens when we screw up? What happens if we don't get it right? What happens if we don't get the listening part right? In the middle of the conversation, how do we get it back on track? The first thing that we want to do is acknowledge that I just messed it up. I'm sorry. Can I take a minute? I didn't mean to come across that way. I apologize for that. Here's what I'm really intending to say. And then you can step back into the conversation. So the first thing is to acknowledge when the conversation shifts. You regain that safety in that conversation by making sure that the person understands your purpose and that they recognize that you respect who they are, whether it's their role or whatever the case might be, because safety is compromised when people don't feel like you're on the same page, purpose, or they don't feel like you respect them. And so we want to make sure that in order to keep that conversation going, that they understand your purpose and respect. Clarify your intent, and then you can go back into the conversation that you are having. But don't just bypass a shift in the conversation. Because if you bypass a shift, someone's body language, the arms crossed, the head turned, they sit back in the seat, or they scoff at you. If you just, or people start crying, if you bypass all of that, then you won't get the result that you want. So we have to get it back on track. And you do that by following these simple steps. Apologize, make sure they understand your purpose and that you respect who they are and what they do. Clarify what your intent is, and then go back to talking about the thing that you were talking about. Thoughts or questions on that? Nope. Okay, so we're at 10:49. Let's come back right at the top of the hour. And then I'm going to share with you this tool that can really help shape the how you have conversations with people. So let's come back at 11 o'clock.
Tish?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to share also, since we were talking about virtual, being a home visitor, a lot of the families are not like tech savvy. So most of the times we're doing calls through the phone, and you miss so much of that nonverbal, not being in the home. Because you can hear the chaos in the background, but just being there, it just gave you so much more kind of concept on what was really going on that you missed so much on the phone. And being virtual for almost over a year now, it's just, I've seen the dynamic change so much because I'm missing such a huge chunk of the information that I used to have from that nonverbal.
How do you course correct for that? Like, how do you try to ascertain information that you used to get, but now you have to do it in a different way? How have you resolved that?
It's hard because sometimes some of the families are very like blunt. And you kind of ask like these follow-up questions like, oh, how is the e-learning going? How are the other kids? You start checking in on other people that are not within like who you serve, but you check on the family as a whole just to kind of get more of an idea. And some people are like, oh, they're fine. And then other times they start sharing more. But we've had so much different experiences where I found out a mom was pregnant in her 3rd trimester because I dropped stuff off. And I was like, we need to start reworking this because there's no way she would have been able to hide the pregnancy that long from me if we weren't virtual. So it's interesting. And we've had different circumstances, but that was just one that was like, it never came up.
Do you guys have like a catalog of questions now that you ask that might be differently than what you would have asked in person?
Yeah, it's not like fully written out, but yeah, we've shared certain situations and stuff where we're just like, now we check this in because apparently if we don't bring it up, it doesn't come in the conversation. So yeah, it's very interesting, the dynamic of especially being a home visitor and not being in the home is just such almost like a 360. Like
that has to be hard. Especially just like, man, like how could I even anticipate it like that? Like that she would be that far along and not say anything. I wonder if like one of the questions you could add to your library of questions is, what big changes have happened in your life over the last, however, like month or 2 weeks or 3 weeks? Things like, what are some situations that have happened with the kids that you're really proud of and want to celebrate? Like stuff like that. So because when we ask, well, how are the kids? Yeah, they're going to be like, yeah, they good, they cool. But if you ask them more specific questions, then it opens up the door for them to communicate more broadly. So getting some specificity to the question might help to open up the conversation a bit more.
Yeah, we've done a couple where I'm like, I follow up. I'm like, oh, how have you done dentist appointments? Have you done this? Have you done that? And then I'll follow up on those. Or like, I know birthdays are coming up and I'll be like, how was that? How was it? So I have to remember more little details of things to kind of get that, where it would be easier for me to remember because I would be in the home and I'd see like the party supplies or whatever, or like we'd be counting it down and I'd be able to see them grow. So it's just like kind of also hard to kind of pinpoint the milestones, especially when they're different developments. And some of them are more delayed than others. Like you can track it by seeing the child every single time you go, and just not being able to see them. They're like, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you they're doing this. And I'm like, what? That's amazing. And they're like, yeah, they started doing that like last month. And I'm like, oh, okay. I'm like, thanks for the update.
Yeah. So yeah, and it's when you look at your questions, are they closed-ended or open-ended? So closed-ended questions give you yes or no responses.
Yeah, that's one thing we've rearranged a lot more to do more open-ended questions to get more of a response than just a yeah, no, oh, it's fine. Yeah, because it's otherwise it's a very dry hour.
And you're like, whoa, okay, all right. Yeah, cool. Welcome back, everyone. We are in our rounding to this last section, but before we go into the communicating with someone differently, I wanted to share a tool with you. I just dropped it in the chat, the driving change discussion plan. I dropped it earlier, but then I dropped it again in case it get lost in the chat. If you could open that up, that would be awesome. I want to walk through that with you. We're going to do some work with that on how do we communicate differently, or how do we communicate, not differently, but how do we communicate a message? So I recognize that some of us are in staff level positions, some of us are leaders, some of us are business owners, so we have a plethora of different roles on our call. The way that this discussion planner is built is to communicate around change. Now, some of us may not necessarily have to communicate a lot around change, but I wanted to provide this because it would be helpful personally, professionally, or what have you. So what this is, when we think about communicating, there are what we call, and this is also in your participant guide, the section called key principles. Let's see if I have that up. Yeah, preparing effective communication, interaction essentials, and key principles. So with key principles, just what this section is when you're engaging with someone, they have needs that they want to protect, and those needs are related to their self-esteem. And so how do we help express our confidence in them? Empathy, how do we express empathy for someone, especially if they're describing something really difficult? How do we give our full attention in that moment, and how do we express to them that we hear what they're saying? We may not necessarily agree with or completely understand it because we're not in their shoes, but expressing empathy at some level. Inviting involvement. So how do we continue to unleash additional ideas from that person? How do we seek their concerns and resistance? So how do we make them a part of the resolution? How do we share our own insights? And sometimes we got to be careful with this because we don't want them to get to a point where they're consoling us. So we want to be careful about how much we disclose of our own feelings and insights, and then providing support. So these are the things that when we think about change, definitely, but just in general, what people's needs are, these are the 5 things. So that's what these key principles are. When you're in communication with someone, you may need to be mindful of all 5, and you might need to address all 5. You might only need to address 1. It really depends on that person and how they're wired. But this helps keeps us on track around satisfying people's personal needs in communication. This box over here is probably my most, I love this model or thing, however you want to call it, around how you talk about changes that are happening. You could do this at home, at work, with anybody. So what this is what I typically do is when I'm in a meeting with a group and I find that we're circling, right? We got that helicopter thing going, we're circling, we're not getting anywhere. And they're just having visceral responses to whatever it is we're talking about, if it's a new project, if it's a change, whatever the case might be. And it's just a lot of complaining, a lot of bickering. So what I do is I draw this 3-column chart. So I write control under one column, influence on another, and no control on the other. And this is what I say. Okay, so related to this particular thing we're talking about, what are all the things we can't control? So I start with this column. So they're going to say, we can't control budget. We can't control rollout schedule. We can't control, there's so many things that they're going to say we can't control, right? And that's almost cathartic for them because they can get all of it out. So then I say, okay, so is this a pretty comprehensive list? Yeah, that's got it. Like that's all, oh my God, that's all the stuff we can't control. So then I pause and say, okay, so if this is all the things we have absolutely no control over, how about we consider not giving this any more energy because there's nothing, it's already set, it's already done, we can't control it. So how about we not focus our attention and energy on this column for the duration of our time together? At first, you're going to hear a pin drop because people are going to be like, what? You just took away the thing that was comfort for them to be able to talk about and complain about this issue. And then you say, let's start talking about some stuff that we can control. Be prepared for the silence, because they're going to be stuck at this column still. Even though you've invited them to move on, they're going to be stuck here. So be okay with the silence. So let's talk about what we can control. And you might have to get that ball rolling a bit because they might be stuck here and not know what they can control. So you might have to say, so here's one thing that based on what I know, we can control. And you kind of give a couple of those and say, okay, let's talk about this. The other thing, if there is absolutely nothing on this list, there should be at least one thing, and it starts with an A. What can we control? What is that? If it starts with an A, what can we control?
Your attitude.
Absolutely. So if there's nothing else on this list, oh, if I could see and spell, it should be that. That should be at least the one thing on the list. So when they get going, so we can say, okay, well, we can't control budget, but we can control our staffing. We can control, we can't control the rollout schedule, but we can control training schedule. So you can start to really help them extract the things that they can control. And then here's the influence. We might not be able to control it, but we might be able to influence moving forward. So the influence that we might have is future change rollout. That might be something that we can influence. We can also influence maybe the cadence of change in the department. So these are some of the, this is a really powerful way to start to give people a sense of control over a situation that they initially thought they had absolutely no control over. Love to hear your thoughts on this section. Make sense? You can use this with your kids. You can use it with whatever kind of project change or whatever that you're going through that it feels like we're not moving forward. You can use something like this. Peggy, you unmuted yourself. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think this is an awesome tool because it's empowering. It gives people thinking about what they could influence based on the things that they can't control. It clears up the conversation to get out of complaint. I'm just really thankful for this exposure. And I think when you're having communication with your team, when you use the word influence, it's just an empowering thing where people don't feel stuck. They feel like I can influence things. These are things I can control. I just really think laying it out like this streamlines conversation and really gets people thinking about how to be innovative and move things forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty powerful. It's interesting to watch how conversations and how meetings shifts when you do something like this. So that's the top half. So that's and then the second half is, well, how do we get the stuff done? How do I communicate what I want to communicate? And we call these interaction guidelines. And there's 5 steps when you're building a communication strategy. So the first one is to open. So describe the purpose of the discussion. What is it that I'm here to talk about? Why is it important? And you can check for understanding at this point or a little bit later. I usually like to, it has it throughout the process. I find that checking for understanding at the opening may not necessarily be relevant at that point. But the whole point is you can see it in all of the different 5 steps because it's important to make sure that the person understands what you're saying. So this is general communication. Describe the purpose, identify the importance. Now, if you want to specifically talk about change, then it gives you some ideas here. Let me make this bigger because I know sometimes it's hard to see. How will I describe the change? What business rationale will I provide? So this is the why behind the what section. So you can use this as a general communication strategy, or if you needed something to help communicate a change, that's where this section comes in for you. The next step is to clarify. So seek and share information about the situation. Seek what are the issues or concerns that they may have, and here's where it might be appropriate to check understanding. So as it relates to change, how will I describe the impact of this change on the person or team? How might the person or team react to this? How might they feel? So it's seeking information from the individual related to the situation that you brought to the table. Step 3 is develop. So ideas for implementing the change, or seek and discuss ideas that they may have. Explore whatever resources that might be needed. So let's say you're having a conversation with your 25-year-old son who has been living at home, and now it's time for him to spread his wings and go out on his own, and you need to have a conversation. So the opening may be, my dear son, I love you with every fiber in my being. The purpose of this conversation is to talk about how we can help and support you in making that next move in your life, which is to be independent on your own. And so here is the dynamic that we're faced with. So seek and share information. What I understand to be true is that, you know, you have a good paying job, you have a nice amount of savings that you've saved up. And there are plenty of areas that you've said that you would love to move to. So what do you see as the positive things about you starting to move in that direction, and what concerns do you have? So that's clarify. Under develop, you can say, okay, so now that we know what we're playing with, what are some ideas that you have in terms of next steps on how we can begin to move this forward? What support do you need from me besides financial? And what resources might you need in order to start to move towards looking for this apartment, and come up with some ideas? And then the agree phase is, what's the contingency plan other than coming back home that you might have? What are some things that you want to put in place? How will we make sure that you're progressing well? How do we check in on your bank account to make sure that you can sustain yourself? So that's what it sounds like from a personal perspective. And when you open, clarify, develop, and agree, and close, which is getting their commitment for next steps. And then if you want to do it for a work-related thing, then you got tips here, these little italicized questions that you can consider. So it's a great tool to frame out your communication. 5-step process. You don't have to guess at it. You just think, what do I want to talk about? How do I get a sense of sharing of the information that's important? Seek their issues and concerns. How do I build a plan with this person? How do we agree, and how do we close out the conversation? That's how you set up a good communication. I'm going to pause, and I'm going to ask what questions you guys have about the discussion planner, because it's a really robust tool, a lot of great information. Thoughts?
I'm going to just say something on I'm kind of going back a little bit on your control, influence, and no control, Tish. I think one of the things that's nice there is it's very solution focused. It really gets people around, you know, there's an old saying, if you're not part of the solution, you are part of the problem. And I think that that having that really kind of more quickly moves people to having a more productive conversation, which once you get to, everybody's starts to feel better, because it has to move to outcomes, right? It has to move to deliverables at the end of the day. So I love that. I think I agree with Peggy that the being able to segment it that way, and then just even thinking about before you hop into it. I think, and this is partly, you see this a lot with remote, you know, we sit from meeting to meeting to meeting. You don't really take the time that you would have taken previously to plan for your meetings in the same way. And so I think having that more intentioned approach to what am I trying to do in this conversation? Where am I trying to go? Kind of that, you know, whole adage, if I don't know where I'm trying to go, any road will take me there. I think that this resonates.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, it's helpful. Lynetta, you said you're still digesting. Say more about that.
Oh, just still trying to understand it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a so there's this one that is specific to driving change, and then there's another one that's just a basic one. And so when I get back to the office, I can also send that one out. That's just a general discussion planner, and you just kind of fill in each of the sections. But what it does is it just helps us take a moment to have an out-of-body experience and plan out our communication. And it makes sure that you have, the biggest part of communicating is being able to explain the why behind the what, and being able to get people on board with the WIFM, what's in it for me. And so this document helps you to address the radio station WIFM, W-I-I-F-M, what's in it for me. So it helps you to kind of get beyond that, because that's the biggest part of getting people to be on board with you is, well, what's in this conversation for me? Why are we even talking about this? So I can send that out, the basic one, when I get back to the office. All right. Okay, so here, just want to close out this listening section with this statement. The most basic and powerful way to connect to another person is to listen. Just listen. Perhaps the most important thing we ever give each other is our attention. So being deliberate about that at home and at work, stopping what we're doing and facing the person to give them our attention. So want to transition into, we've talked about communication, we've talked about listening. So how does that work related to our own individual styles? Many of you completed your DISC assessment, and some of us may have signed up for this session, but not necessarily the full series. Those of us who signed up for the full series had access to completing the DISC assessment. And I recognize that some of us on the call have, and some of us have not. So I want to give us a quick overview of DISC, and just a reminder, because Rick talked about it during session 1. So it's been a little bit of time, so I just want to bring this back to the forefront. As you know, DISC is broken down out into 4 elements. So being decisive is D, interactive is our I, steadiness, and cautious. And so here's some another way to kind of think about it. When we think about folks who are decisive and interactive, they are very fast-paced people. On the other side of us, where we see moderate pace, is our cautious and people who work very steady. People who are a bit more skeptical are the decisive and cautious folks, and people who are a little bit more accepting are our interactive and our steadiness. So when you think about where you might fall, are you going to be on the top half, which is very fast paced, or the bottom half, moderate or moderate paced? Are you going to be on this side more skeptical, or are you going to be on this side more accepting? So if you haven't taken the assessment, you can kind of think about where you might fall. And if you are nice to Rick, he might send you out an assessment. There might be a small fee associated with that if you didn't sign up for the full session, but you can get access to that. And Rick or I would be more than happy to help you with that if you wanted to know what your DISC preferences are if you haven't already taken it. The other element I want to share with you are the different descriptions, if you will, for each of the different styles. So under interactive, their priorities are very energized, pioneering, and very affirming. These are your socialites. These are people who have a lot of energy, fast pace, enjoy lots of relationships, group activities, friendly relationships. Their fears are being rejected socially, having disapproval, loss of influence, and being ignored. You will notice that these are people who have the personality of being very charming, very sociable, enthusiastic, optimistic, and can come across as talkative. Their limitations are that they can be a bit impulsive and may lack a little bit of follow through and disorganization, because they're so fast paced. They launch one thing and then they're on to the next. So detail may not necessarily be their strong suit. Under steadiness, people with the preference of S, your priorities are being inclusive, very humble, very affirming of other people, want to make sure that relationships are very harmonious. They're motivated by stable environments, not a whole lot of change. They really express sincere appreciation. They're very cooperative, very ingratiating with other people, and want to help others. Their fear is the loss of stability and having a lot of change, and not having harmony within a group that really they take that to heart, and they never ever want to offend anyone. So those are fears. So you'll notice that people who have a preference for steadiness are patient, team player. They have a very calming approach, good listener, and exhibit a lot of humility. Sometimes, though, people with the preference of S can be overly accommodating, tendency to avoid change. It can come across as indecisive because they're trying to maintain the harmony. People with a preference for caution they're very deliberate, very thoughtful, humble as well, resolute, and they also care about quality. They care about their expertise being valued, and they care about being right. Motivated by opportunities to use that expertise and gain knowledge. And again, that quality is really important. Their fears is their knowledge being criticized, being wrong about something that they spent a lot of time on, or methods that are just thrown together. That's what we mean by slipshod. They're just methods that are thrown together and not thought out. That's a fear. So you'll notice that these are people who are very precise. They analyze things very carefully. And because they analyze things carefully, they might come across as a skeptic. They're more reserved and quiet. Some of their blind spots might be overly critical, over analyzed, and because they they're really thinking through a lot, and they're in their head, might come across as self-isolating. And our last behavior descriptors for our Ds, decisive, can be a bit more commanding, more pioneering, motivated by power and authority, being successful. The fear is loss of control, and being taken advantage of, and being perceived as vulnerable. You'll notice that these people can be very direct, sometimes experienced as forceful, very confident. Some of their limitations is they might come across as insensitive, that they move too quickly and not necessarily think about the people that are involved, and maybe a little bit impatient. So I want you guys to, especially if you didn't take the assessment, kind of mark where you think you might be if you have a preference for D, which is decisive, interactive, very much so focused on relationships. Steadiness is kind of our stable environments, peacemakers, want harmony, cooperation, or cautious, very analytical. Quality is really important. So just mark where you think you may be. Because one of the things that is tough is how we communicate with someone who is different than we are, right? When we have someone who communicates the same, that's great. But when someone communicates different than we do, it could cause an issue. And so what I want us to do is spend some time understanding the different preferences that each of us have related to DISC. So I'm gonna actually just put you in rooms. The way that I had it set up is I had the people with the highest and highest for D and highest for I in the room together, but because everyone is different in terms of if they complete the assessment or not, it doesn't work out. So I'm just going to put you in rooms, and I want you to have a conversation with one another considering these questions. I'm going to pull up this slide, and I want someone, well, each of you will need to take a picture of it because you don't know who's going to be in your group, but I want you to identify your highest DISC dimension. Discuss examples of your dimension in action. So what does it look like on a day-to-day basis for you to be someone who's decisive, someone who's very strategic and planning and fast moving, or someone who is more interactive, meaning focus on relationships, or someone who's more analytical? What does it look like in action for you? Discuss strategies to maximize communication with individuals whose preference is opposite of yours. So in your group, you're going to identify what your highest DISC dimension is, if you have it. If you're not sure, you could just take your best guess based on the description that I gave. I want you to talk about what does that particular preference look like in action? And then how do you maximize communication with someone who is the complete opposite as you? So you can take a picture of this slide. I'll also go back to this one if you want to take a picture of this one. That gives you an overview of each of the different preferences. We have an expert on our call, so I'm going to ask Rick, do you have any thoughts to share in addition to what we just talked about related to DISC?
No, you've done pretty well. And the good news is the folks from NCTV have also taken the assessment, or at least most of them have. So they should have a sense of it all. I think that covers almost everybody. So we should be in good shape.
All right, cool. So I'm going to pop you in rooms. What questions can I answer before I send you off to discuss those 3 questions? All right, cool. So here we go. I mean, we got 28. So we're going to have recreate. All right. Actually, I want more people. Yep. All right, so here we go.
I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to be doing that, but okay.
I didn't even think they let you take your phone inside those.
I didn't either. I don't know what she's up to. I don't know. I'm glad you're here. It's great. Does anyone want to jump in? I think a lot of people on our team were high S's. I'm an ISDC. So the questions are, sorry.
Right, to be fair, identify your highest disc dimension, examples of your dimension in action, and strategies to maximize communication with individuals whose preferences set. Did everyone look at their disc, or did you?
Yeah, I got it in front of me. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah,
so we got 4 eyes.
I think 3 eyes.
Wait, Marsha, what did you say?
S.
No, I had 99 for S and 99 for C. So both S and C were way up there.
Okay.
I was only 39.
Can I have some of your S, please? I'll give you a little bit of my I for some of your S, right?
Yeah. That's cool. So I'm high I and S, but I am
So, Raquel, were you I also?
Yeah, I'm 99 for I, and then the next one is 63 for S, and then everything else is like C is 30% and D is 49%. So I think that's pretty low. So for me, it's what, I and S.
Yeah.
Same as yours, Lynetta, right?
Yeah. Yeah. She was I and then S.
And then I'm I and then D. My D is 56. But my I is 99. So it's like, yeah.
Huh. Yeah, it's interesting. Okay.
All right, Cheryl. So you're I, then D.
I'm I then D. And then my S and C are pretty equal, 46 and 39.
Yeah.
So
So what's interesting, like for you, because you're D, most of the folks in this space is I. What are some ways that you would interact with Cheryl, considering her D? Like, so if you're an I or an S, particularly an S, because that's like opposite this way. Cheryl, what's important to you in communication with someone who's an S? And S is what's important to you in when you're trying to communicate with Cheryl. And so what she may need to do is just kind of express to you what does her D look like? And then you can kind of have conversation around, well, then what does communication need to look like?
Yeah, I definitely, this really relates even to my job, because like, I'm like, okay, can we
risk, and I really want to make sure I'm looking into, you know, protecting that. I feel like I can be decisive at home because I have the best interests of my family at stake. I don't want to mess up someone else's family or livelihood.
It's interesting. It sounds like the environment dictates our communication because you guys have quantitative and tangible results you can point to, whereas we are qualitative and a little bit less tangible. It's more of a, did you like that? You know, as opposed to, did we make money on that? So I find that interesting.
Yep.
I have to worry more about the money part of it.
That's true.
But just saying, I also work at NCTV. I'm the executive director, and I'm an I, though I have to be a lot of D these days. But I think interactive. I like to interact. I like people to come with me on that decision, so that because I feel like that buy-in is important. So that's where I argue a little bit with this disc, and I have with Rick a lot of on this assessment, because I have to be very decisive. But I find if I drop the hammer on people, you know, Kevin do this, Kim do that, then they just give me the finger back, and I get no results. Yeah. Not really, but that's so I feel like the interactive part is also very D, because you have to bring that team along. You have to get them to work with you. And to me, that's very decisive and that's very deliberate. So maybe my D is more deliberate. But I understand the conservativeness because I also have to be that. So I feel like I'm just really all the alphabet soup there. Because I'm limited by budget. So, and I have to be cautious on that. And more importantly, my conservatives and caution comes in with how we present things, and that we're always balanced, so that we in the news industry don't get, you know, as much, you know, negative comments slung at us than normal. You know, there's a certain level of disagreement, and we appreciate that with the news, and it just happens, but we try not to get, you know, all the arrows coming at us at one time. So
Evan, what about you, our S friend?
Just looking at the
details and being into like the data. I'm more reserved compared to maybe the D and the I's, where it's like the bigger picture thinking and things like that. So it works out in my work setting with the teammates of just being able to work together in our differences like that.
And Sophia, what company are you with?
I'm with the YWCA.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. Well, mine was a high I, and my second one is like Justin. I'm an S. That's my second one, and they're very close. And I would say it's probably pretty
And even intellectually, when you recognize that no is the right answer.
Yeah.
Yesenia, how about you? What?
I actually am like, I think 1 point away from being like a high S and I. Like
Okay.
they're almost even. I don't remember, it's like 1 point difference though, but they're like, I'm right in between both. So I am very talkative. I do like to kind of make that connection with the clients and that's why the home visitor part of me like loves it and building that rapport, because it's kind of hard to just go into someone's house, and just
Sure.
establish that relationship. So that's really important for me. But also I pay attention to like little details. And I try to kind of remember those throughout the visit to kind of help build that connection. But I do also struggle sometimes saying no. And then I'm like organized, but in my mess, if that makes sense. So that's why I'm like in between those two, because someone will be like,
So you have a
into my
piling
office
system,
and
not a
see-
filing system.
Yeah, and see, we do have a filing system, but I also have like a million post-it notes and like my bulletin board and all this. And then someone will be like, where is this? And I'm like, oh, it's under this packet on my desk in
Love
this
it.
drawer.
Mhm.
And I don't know, it's just madness, but it makes sense to me. So I'm working on getting it so that if someone had to step in for me, they would also understand. So I can't have it as messy. So that's one thing that I've been working on with like paperwork wise.
Welcome back. That time went fast. I was ear hustling in each of the different groups, and you guys have had some great conversations happening. So what I want to do is I want to call your attention to your participant guide where it says communication style preferences. And what I want you to do is skip to the section that says key strategy. And as a big group, because I know that our group was kind of, we had a mix of, sometimes we had all 4 dimensions, sometimes we had more of dimension than the other. So as a big group, what I want us to talk about is that last question, which is, what are some communication strategies on how to communicate with someone effectively who might be opposite of you, right? And so if you're a D, what would be helpful for you when you're communicating with someone who's an S and vice versa? So I really want to throw out some of those ideas, and I want you, as you're hearing really good ideas, and you're like, ooh, that's a good one. So if you find yourself saying, ooh, that's a good one, that means write it down. So talk to me, what are some of your strategies, ideas, recommendations on how to communicate more effectively with someone who's opposite? So let's take D and S first. D is decisive, S is steadiness.
As a D, we were talking, I was saying, when we come to meetings, it's being mindful of the folks who need more facts, who need more information before they come to a decision, whereas I tend to cycle through and be like, okay, this is what we should do. Let's move on. It's coming to the meeting prepared with, okay, Joe is going to need to, have the background on it. He's going to want to know, what are some real world results, and making sure that you supply what those, personality types need to make sure that they're making the most mindful decision for them.
Cool. So coming with the information, anticipating what someone might need and honoring that and coming with that. Awesome. Who else? DNS. I take one more. What would be helpful in communicating with someone who's opposite? Yep, Kevin.
On the contrary, the exact opposite is of Kim. I'm a high S. So essentially what I try and do is condense the information. If I know that, I've got somebody who is going to be more decisive and wants something done more succinctly and efficiently, I'll try and give them the boiled down version, present them with the most pertinent facts, and kind of just lay it out there without any other fluff.
Okay. So that's good. It's don't give me the fluff. Kim, do you like that? Don't give me the fluff. Just give me the facts. Just give me what
I like
need.
I often say to my husband, I get it. Sum up. Which is, again, I need to invest my deposits at home, but that's another story. Carry on.
All right, cool. So let's look at this side. So remember, interactive at the top and cautious. So we're opposite. So let's talk about some strategies that would be helpful as the two are interacting with one another and communicating.
I think for me as a high I, it's important to engage in someone's quietness and to ask and check in. So tell me what you're thinking, or tell me, where you're at, because I can just plow over it. And, and I think by doing that, they typically do have a lot of insight and something to share. And they're not quiet just because they're in agreement. They just are a little bit more cautious. So I think for me is really just engaging in that and checking in.
Okay. I like that. I like that piece, is embracing that quietness, because our high eyes are like very talkative, and it's like, come on, aren't you tracking with me? Like, what's up? But the C's are like, I need a little bit of time to think about that. Right? So talk to me, C's, talk to me. Raquel, were you going to say something?
I'm a high I, and seeing things from a C's perspective makes me feel that I need to kind of introduce the fact that I'm a high I, like initially, where I have to say, I'm a collaborator, I'm an interactor, I'm sorry, and not necessarily apologize for it, but kind of like let them know what they're in for, kind of, I guess. And I usually say, I'll come into a meeting and I'll be like, okay, I'm a questioner, I like to ask a lot of questions. And I say like right off the bat, so then they kind of know, okay, we're dealing with a live wire over here, so the C's will be more like, okay, this is just, who she is. And it doesn't really reflect on, what I'm emitting. It's more of what this person is. And so I kind of go into it saying like, in my own way, like this is how I am. So like, I apologize if it comes off because I'm always like, well, what do you think? And what do you I want to hear from everyone, so some people are put off by that because I think it is intrusive to the quiet, and like Cheryl said, so I've learned a lot as to how to approach a C, or so. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's how I would.
Okay. How about my C's? What you thinking? Because I know you're thinking. Notice the quiet, because they're thinking.
Okay, and sometimes overthinking too.
Are you a C?
I'm a high S and C are both high.
Okay, so when you're interacting with someone who is who has a preference for interactive, what have been some kind of strategies that you've used so that you're both hearing one another?
I think being the high S&C, or maybe it just doesn't have anything to do with the S&C, but earlier when we were speaking, I was noticing that maybe it's the cautious part, but then I tend to be quiet and not wanting to speak up. Mm-hmm. So when Cheryl was just saying, the opposite of asking and asking and checking in with the C, it was like, oh, that'd be nice, because maybe you might have something to say, but just didn't want to speak up. But then you're afraid if you don't have something to share or input, then it's like you don't want them to ask you either. If you're not prepared. So
yeah,
and that goes. Worry about that.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I think that goes to the part of the C that your expertise is really important, and that expertise and knowledge is honored. And you, as C's, I'm a C, we never want to be perceived that we don't know our stuff. And so if it's ever that, it's off-putting for us. And it's probably more about us than it is about the other person, but we never want to come across that we don't know our stuff, because that's how we're wired. We're wired to analyze. We're wired to see things from so many different perspectives. And so when that's compromised, we're like, what is happening right now? So yeah, what you said speaks to the dynamic of someone who is a C.
The other thing that came up in our group is right towards the end, a couple of people had noticed Lynetta had asked to reread, because we had one gal that hadn't done the disc, so wasn't sure. So we reread everything, and she's, now where do you think you fit in? And she's a high I, and so it was just, they were commenting, it was just dead on how she was interactive and she was bringing others in, and so she was not definitely acting her assessments and such. So that was something they noticed. It was real interesting.
That's cool. You do. It's interesting how you do, like when you're aware of it, you start to see it, like how it shows up in interactions. Like, oh, now I see it. I see it at play. I see that in action. So that's cool. So this last section, our time flew, is around feedback. Fearing it, like, do we fear it or do we embrace it? That's a huge part of communication. Creating safety and intention in the communication, and making sure that the way that we create safety is mining this thing called the pool of shared meaning. And we're actually going to talk more about this at our next section. So I just want to kind of put it out there to kind of whet our appetite around what kind of environment are we creating for people to feel safe to share what they have to say. And because sometimes we pollute this with our attitude, judgment, and all that stuff. So we're going to talk about how do we keep this clean so that people will want to engage in conversation and communication with us. This is a model that we use for sharing feedback. It's called STAR and STAR AR. So when you're sharing feedback, it's about stating the situation and task, what was the action, and what was the result of the action. The AR is what's an alternative action and what's an alternative result. And so here's an example. When you came into the office today, you stated that everyone here is lazy and you don't know why you even waste your time with such bums. You went into your office and slammed the door. As a result of that, several of your peers made formal complaints to human resources. So this is a clear STAR. The situation is outlined, their behavior is outlined, the impact of their behavior is outlined, and then the alternative solution is this question you could ask: how could you have handled that differently? So that's an alternative solution or an alternative result or response to what they're thinking and feeling. So STAR AR really helps to outline and give feedback, and very specific: what's the situation, what had happened, and what's the impact. You guys are going to get these slides, so you'll have this. This was pulled from Harvard Business Review, and I know we got 1 minute left. Pulled from Harvard Business Review on how to solicit feedback from your kids. But as I was looking at it, it still so applies to soliciting feedback from anyone, personally or professionally. And so the reference here looks like it's, it's soliciting feedback from kids, but you can tweak the questions to solicit feedback from other people. First step, prepare, and it gives you some questions. Conduct the conversation, step 2. Step 3 is respond, being careful about your pool of shared meaning, and then follow up. So I want you guys to spend some time with this so that you can get into this habit of soliciting and receiving feedback gracefully. So that brings us to our time. And this is our field work. And I'm really, inviting everyone to do this because it's important. Solicit feedback from someone. So we can do one of 3 things. Solicit feedback from someone that you've been anxious to get feedback from. And you may say, Tish, I'm not real comfortable with that. So we can save this one for the next one if you're not comfortable. Seek an opportunity to provide timely feedback to someone using the STAR model. The other option that you have here for field note and field work, and it's not on here, is to complete that discussion planner that we talked about earlier. So those are your 3 options. My recommendation, just because we didn't spend a whole lot of time here, is to fill out that discussion planner if you don't feel comfortable with one of these other 2. And we just have to have that done by the 18th. And then our next section is June 8th at 9. I'll be back in the country by then. So what questions can I answer before? Yes, I will send these slides out to you guys. They'll probably come from someone in the chamber because they have the list of who signed up for today. But yes, you guys will get all of these. What questions can I answer before we depart each other's presence? We all good? All right, so we are going to communicate and listen with intention. Next time we come together, we're going to talk about, well, what happens when I do that and somehow conflict arises? That's what we're going to talk about next time. Cool beans?
Mm-hmm.
Have an awesome day, guys. I'm going to go on the beach right now. See ya.
Put your sunscreen on, Tish.
Yes, definitely.
And hydrate.
Yes. Have to hydrate before you have the DOD.
Mm.